Section 0 of a brief account of the destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. A brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de Las Casas. Translator unknown. Section 0. The argument of this narrative by way of preface to the reader. The reverend author of this compendious summary was Bartolomeus de Las Casas, alias Casas, a pious and religious person, as appears by his zealous transports in this narrative for promotion of the Christian faith, elevated from a friar of the Dominican order to sit in the episcopal chair, who was frequently importuned by good and learned men, particularly historians, to publish this summary, who so prevailed with him that he collected out of that copious history which might and ought to be written on this subject the contents of this concise treatise, with intention to display unto the world the enormities, etc., the Spaniards committed in America during their residence there, to their eternal ignominy, and for the author finding that no admonitions or reprehensions, how mild soever, could operate upon or sink into the rocky-hearted tyrants in those occidental parts, he therefore took up a firm resolution, being then about 50 years of age, as he himself declares, to run the hazards and dangers by sea, and the risk of a long voyage into Spain, there to acquaint and certify the most illustrious Prince Philip, the son and heir of his Imperial Majesty Charles V of blessed memory, with the horrid crimes, etc., perpetrated in those countries, part whereof he had seen, and part heard from such as boasted of their wickedness. Whereupon his Caesarian Majesty, moved with a tender and Christian compassion towards these inhabitants of the countries of America, languishing for want of redress, he called a council at Valladolid, Anno Domini 1542, consisting of learned and able men, in order to the reformation of the West Indian government, and took such a course that from that time their tyranny and cruelty against those barbarians was somewhat repressed, and those nations in some measure delivered from that intolerable and more than Egyptian bondage, or at least the Spaniards' ill usage and treatment of the Americans was alleviated and abated. This book, mostly historical, part typographical, was published first by the author in Spanish at Seville, after that translated into Latin by himself, and in process of time into High Dutch, Low Dutch, French, and now English, which is the 6th language it has been taught to speak, that anyone, of what nation soever, might in this narrative contemplate and see as in a mirror the dismal and pernicious fruits that lacquey and attend unlimited and close-fisted avarice, and thereby learn to abhor and detest it, Cain, Pejus, and Angui, it being the predominant and chiefest motive to the commission of such inexpressible outrages, as here in part are faintly, not fully represented, which sin the pagan Indians themselves did exprobate in the Spaniards with all detestation, ignominy, and disgrace. For when they had taken some of them prisoners, which was rarely, they bound them hand and foot, laid them on the ground, and then pouring melted gold down their throats, cried out and called to them aloud in derision, "Yield, throw up thy gold, O Christian, vomit and spew out the metal which hath so inquinated and envenomed both body and soul, that hath stained and infected thy mind with desires and contrivances, and thy hands with commission of such matchless enormities. I will then shut up all this, being but an extract of what is in the prefatory part of the original. I earnestly beg and desire all men to be persuaded that this summary was not published upon any private design, sinister ends, or affection in favor or prejudice of any particular nation, but for the public emolument and advantage of all true Christians and moral men throughout the whole world. Farewell. End of section 0. Section 1 of a brief account of the destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. A brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de Las Casas. Translator unknown. Section 1. The cruelties of the Spaniards committed in America. America was discovered and found out Anno Domini 1492, and the year ensuing inhabited by the Spaniards, and afterward a multitude of them travelled thither from Spain for the space of 49 years. Their first attempt was on the Spanish island, which indeed is a most fertile soil, and at present in great reputation for its spaciousness and length, containing in circumference 600 miles. Nay, it is on all sides surrounded with an almost innumerable number of islands, which we found so well peopled with natives and foreigners that there is scarce any region in the universe fortified with so many inhabitants. But the mainland or continent, distant from this island 250 miles and upwards, extends itself above 10,000 miles in length, near the seashore, which lands are some of them already discovered, and more may be found out in process of time. And such a multitude of people inhabits these countries that it seems as if the omnipotent God has assembled and convocated the major part of mankind in this part of the world. Now this infinite multitude of men are by the creation of God innocently simple, altogether void of and averse to all manner of craft, subtlety, and malice, and most obedient and loyal subjects to their native sovereigns, and behave themselves very patiently, submissively, and quietly towards the Spaniards, to whom they are subservient and subject, so that finally they live without the least thirst after revenge, laying aside all litigiousness, commotion, and hatred. This is a most tender and effeminate people, and so imbecile and unequal balanced temper, that they are altogether incapable of hard labor, and in few years, by one distemper or other, soon expire, so that the very issue of lords and princes, who among us live with great affluence, and fard deliciously, are not more effeminate and tender than the children of their husbandmen or laborers. This nation is very necessitous and indigent, masters of very slender possessions, and consequently neither haughty nor ambitious. They are parsimonious in their diet, as the holy fathers were in their frugal life in the desert, known by the name of eremites. They go naked, having no other covering but what conceals their pudends from public sight, and hairy plaid or loose coat about an ell, or a coarse woven cloth at most 2 ells long, serves them for the warmest winter garment. They lie on a coarse rug or mat, and those that have the most plentiful estate or fortunes, the better sort, use net work knotted at the 4 corners in lieu of beds, which the inhabitants of the island of Hispaniola in their own proper idiom term hammocks. The men are pregnant and docible, the natives tractable and capable of morality or goodness, very apt to receive the instilled principles of Catholic religion, nor are they averse to civility and good manners, being not so much discomposed by a variety of obstructions as the rest of mankind, insomuch that having sucked in, if I may so express myself, the very first rudiments
of the Christian faith. They are so transported with zeal and fervor in the exercise of ecclesiastical sacraments and divine service, that the very religiosos themselves stand in need of the greatest and most signal patience to undergo such extreme transports. And to conclude, I myself have heard the Spaniards themselves, who dare not assume the confidence to deny the good nature predominant in them, declare that there was nothing wanting in them for the acquisition of eternal beatitude, but the sole knowledge and understanding of the Deity. The Spaniards first assaulted the innocent sheep, so qualified by the Almighty, as is prementioned, like most cruel tigers, wolves, and lions, hunger-starved, studying nothing, for the space of 40 years after their first landing. But the massacre of these wretches, whom they have so inhumanely and barbarously butchered and harassed with several kinds of torments never before known or heard of which you shall have some account in the following discourse, that of 3 millions of persons which lived in Hispaniola itself, there is at present but the inconsiderable remnant of scarce 300, nay, the Isle of Cuba, which extends as far as Valladolid in Spain, is distant from Rome, lies now uncultivated, like a desert, and entombed in its own ruins. You may also find the Isles of St. John and Jamaica, both large and fruitful places, unpeopled and desolate. The Lucayan Islands on the north side, adjacent to Hispaniola and Cuba, which are 60 in number, or thereabout, together with those vulgarly known by the name of the Gigantic Isles, and others, the most infertile whereof exceeds the royal garden of Seville in fruitfulness, a most healthful and pleasant climate, is now laid waste and uninhabited. And whereas when the Spaniards first arrived here, about 500,000 men dwelt in it, they are now cut off, some by slaughter, and others ravished away by force and violence, to work in the mines of Hispaniola, which was destitute of native inhabitants, for a certain vessel sailing to this isle, to the end that the harvest being over, some good Christian moved with piety and pity undertook this dangerous voyage to convert souls to Christianity, the remaining gleanings might be gathered up. There were only found 11 persons, which I saw with my own eyes. There are other islands, 30 in number, and upward, bordering upon the Isle of St. John, totally unpeopled, all which are above 2,000 miles in length, and yet remain without inhabitants, native or people. As to the firm land, we are certainly satisfied and assured that the Spaniards, by their barbarous and execrable actions, have absolutely depopulated 10 kingdoms, of greater extent than all Spain, together with the kingdoms of Aragon and Portugal, that is to say, above 1,000 miles, which now lie waste and desolate, and are absolutely ruined, when as formerly no other country whatsoever was more populous. Nay, we dare boldly affirm that during the 40 years' space wherein they exercised their sanguinary and detestable tyranny in these regions, above 12 millions, computing men, women, and children, have undeservedly perished. Nor do I conceive that I should deviate from the truth by saying that above 50 millions in all paid their last debt to nature. Those that arrived at these islands from the remotest parts of Spain, and who pride themselves in the name of Christians, steered 2 courses principally, in order to the extirpation and exterminating of this people from the face of the earth. The first whereof was raising an unjust, sanguinolent, cruel war; the other by putting them to death, who hitherto thirsted after their liberty, or designed, which the most potent, strenuous, and magnanimous spirits intended, to recover their pristine freedom, and shake off the shackles of so injurious a captivity. For they being taken off in war, none but women and children were permitted to